Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so grateful to be able to share with you today the valuable information that we're going to talk about around protecting your church. And I want to start off first by saying that we don't intend for any of this material or content to be salesy in any way. That's not the point. We really want this information and the content to be relevant for all churches, all ministries, organizations, and designed around keeping your ministry safe and secure, protecting those in your care. And so we're going to talk about policies and procedures and things that will apply regardless of, who you're using for your background screening or how long you've been in existence or how many people you have on a weekend. We really want this to be universally applicable for you and your church, your congregation. So get that out of the way. My name is Ryan Carter. I am the director of sales here at Protect My Ministry. Been here for almost 14 years. I started back in April of 2007. At the time, I think we had a staff of 7 people and roughly 1,000 churches. And my experience has been really just a great experience here, having seen us grow from really a mom and pop dedicated to protecting churches and passionate about that to now we're a significantly larger organization, but our passion and our desire to serve the church hasn't changed. And we still have the same heartbeat of wanting to protect churches and ministries. We're located here in sunny Tampa, Florida. And our team here, we've had a combined, I don't even know, probably 50, 60 plus years of background screening just on our executive leadership team. And so we're really excited to be able to help churches and ministries all over the country. We serve over 35,000 now in all 50 states. And so we've had a great experience and been very fortunate and blessed to grow and excited to help churches here. So let's get started. We want to talk about first why we're doing this. I've always been a big why guy. Why are we presenting this information? What's the point? If we're not trying to sell something truly, if we're not trying to make money on this, then what's the point? And so I think the heartbeat for me comes back to a story I had long ago before I ever started moving here. I remember my brother-in-law was taking his newborn niece into church, into Sunday school, and was dropping her off. And I remember him telling me about the conversation he had with the children's ministry director at the time. And it was something along the lines of, what do you all do for child protection? Or, are you screening your volunteers? Do you have training? Or what's that all look like? And the volunteer or the coordinator, the children's ministry director, kind of gave him a blank stare and was like, Grandma Betty's been here for as long as we can remember. And needless to say, that did not exactly give him any sort of comfort. And so at the time, he had owned another background screening company and told them, you know what, let me do this for you. Let me help kind of guide you through this. And so it kind of got everything started. And the reality is, if parents feel like their kids are unsafe, they'll leave and they will not come back. That's going to be one of the things that very early on, as a family is looking to get involved in a church, especially, they're going to try to discover, is this a safe place? Is this a safe place for my kids? And it's a no-brainer. If it's not, then I'll move on, and it'll be very, very quick, and you'll never even know they got out the back door, and you won't know the reason why. So we want to help churches prepare for the unexpected, and we want to give helpful pieces and know, okay, so how do we do this? So what are we talking about? So let's get some very practical guidelines in place. So what do you do if the power goes out? How do you handle the situation if you have a child come up missing? If you suspect the child is being abused, either on church property or even outside of church property, 90% of the time when there are cases of abuse, it is from someone that the victim knows. It's not typically stranger danger or the snatch and grab story that we hear on occasion. That is not typically how children are abused or neglected. It's almost always by someone that they know. So how can you coach your volunteers, have your staff all on the same page and know, okay, what are we looking for? Are we all looking for the same things? And the bottom line, again, I want to repeat in maybe a different way, but if parents feel they're at a place where their kid cannot comfortably or safely attend the ministry, they're going to look for a different place to go to church. So we want to prevent that. So let's talk about, how do we get started? What are the basics? Where do we kind of build our foundation and then move on from there? So let's start this. The plan needs to start with the children's ministry point leader, whether that's the the pastor, the children's ministry director, Sunday school, whatever that person is, whoever has that role. And then it needs to move up the ladder to the rest of the church leadership team, all of the staff members, the key volunteers, and then make sure that everybody is on the same page and in agreement when it comes to developing the main child protection policies, procedures designed around protecting the church. So we want to focus on 4 main areas. So the first one is going to be emergencies. So all the different emergency situations that you can think of and that you can prepare for. How do we handle parents? Because that is another fun ball of wax. If you've been in ministry at all for any length of time, you're aware. The volunteer policies, procedures, how we're going to engage, how we're going to train, and all the different things we're going to do. And then the physical classroom protection policies. How do we do that? So let's talk about breaking down those areas. And I want to give just some highlights in the kind of the 100,000 foot view, if you will. Emergencies. So let's talk about some of the main ones. Fire evacuation procedures. Make sure you've got all of your signs in place. You have evacuation routes. Weather emergency procedures. How are we going to communicate to our congregation, to people that are interested in coming when we're closed, whether that's due to inclement weather, whether it's snow, whatever the case may be. Missing child procedure. We have seen that happen in some unique ways. I'll talk about that shortly. Suspicion person procedure. Do you have a security team on board? Do you have just a handful of a deacon and elder? It's their responsibility to kind of be on the lookout for any suspicious behavior. Power outage procedure. Do you have a generator? Do you not? What are we going to do when and if the power goes out? And then active shooters. That's unfortunately become a little bit more common. Things have changed obviously over the past decade. I remember 10 years ago, we never even talked about it and it was non-existent, unheard of really. And now churches actively do need to prepare for that in their ministry. So these procedures should explain to staff members and volunteers 2 things. 1, what to do with kids in these situations, and 2, how to handle parents. That's something we need to make sure we're communicating, because we don't just talk about what do we do with the children and how do we protect them, but also how do we communicate to parents what they're supposed to do in the event of a child emergency or an emergency that affects their children. Because the first thing that a parent's going to do, and you can see my little shrine back here, I have 4 small children ranging in age from 2 to 10. I am going to actively go after them. That's the first thing I'm going to do instinctively, is going to move towards the child. So there are some emergencies where maybe you need to communicate, whether in a written policy or in signs or in meetings, something to the effect of, this is how we're going to handle a scenario, whether it's a fire, something weather related, power goes out, God forbid, active shooter, whatever any case may be. We're going to have a designated zone. We're going to have this escape path. You need to meet your child in this area. You need to have all of these things clearly documented and communicated long before they ever are involved. And all of your volunteers also need to be aware of those. Parents. So here's some common things we need to have policies and things written down about. Check-in and check-out policy, parent responsibility policies, wellness policies. Obviously, we're doing this in a COVID age. We're wrapping up 2020, coming into 2021. Obviously, that's a big topic. How are we handling wellness? Parent custody policy and media release form. And I want to combine a little bit with a parent custody and parent responsibility, because I'll give you a very practical example of why this is so important to have check-in and check-out policies. We had a church that we're aware of. They had the mother drop off a child at the Sunday school. And while the child was there, the father, who was actually estranged from the mother, they were going through a very bitter separation, divorce, custody battle. He came and checked the daughter out while the mother was in church, did not have the sticker, did not have permission, and it ended up being a very bad situation. Nothing bad happened to the child, but it's one of those things where, as a volunteer or somebody there, that person didn't ask for a sticker. They didn't ask, how that was supposed to go. And so there was a custody issue that created a lot of tension between the family, the church, the daughter, and it was not a good situation. So make sure that you've got either a check-in with a sticker, If the person does not come back with that sticker to check out the child, you don't get the child, because there are situations like that could happen. And next thing you know, you're in really hot water with either the child or something else that could be not a good situation. So that's just one example of many that could come up. So let's talk about the physical safety. That's important as well. The classrooms, the child is going to spend more time in your classrooms than anywhere else in the church. So the simpler you can make it for volunteers to navigate, the better it is, and the more time they can spend investing in, caring for, and praying for the children. So here's some things to consider. Allergy guardrails. So peanuts and Lord knows all the other allergies that are out there now. We need to be aware of those and have policies for don't bring this into the classroom. We're going to handle it that way. Discipline. I've seen churches that have like a pager system where, hey, we're going to page you. And if your child gets out of line or they're crying inconsolably and you need to come get them from the nursery, or whatever the case may be, make sure you've got a way to communicate with the parents in such a way that if they needed to be reached, you have a way to do so. Classroom cleanliness guardrails. So how often are we cleaning? How are we cleaning it? Whose responsibility is that? What are the active steps? They have to do a checklist of things. That really goes a long way in helping parents and volunteers, all of us, feel more safe in those environments. So volunteers, really, this is another huge area. They are the lifeblood of the ministry. Your volunteers should be your number one priority, because you can't navigate a children's ministry alone. And let me add, you definitely can't successfully do it for any long term. You may be able to hero, Superman, Superwoman yourself through that for a very brief amount of time, but eventually it's not going to go well. So you need to make sure that you have a great team of volunteers and you surround yourself with like-minded people who have hearts to serve and are in the ministry for the right reasons that you know, and you've interviewed, you have the positions all lined out. So you've got the right people in the right places doing things that fall in line with their giftings. For me personally, I'm a fairly decent communicator. I do not do well with small children. So that would not be a good thing for me. You want me to lead or teach a Bible study? I'm all in. Let's do it. You want me to watch small children? Somebody's going to get hurt, and it's probably going to be me, because they're going to run me down and it's going to end badly for me. So let's line up people in their giftings so that they know, here's the ministry description. Here's what you're going to be doing. Here's what is going to be required. Let's make sure that this fits your gifting and your skill set, so we're not putting the wrong people in the wrong places. And then, of course, child abuse education. And so that's one thing that we're going to kind of, let's say, transition into: child abuse prevention, neglect prevention. Then overall, now we're going to talk about the liability portion of it. So the first thing that we want to get into is background checks. And so the training and the policies, those are all some of the things you can do on the front end to establish safe and secure environments. And a very big component of that is having a good background check process in place. So that needs to be something you're doing anytime you are going to bring on new staff members, new volunteers, and anyone who has interaction with minors at your church or your organization. You need to make sure that we have a good background screening policy. So when we say background checks 101, what are we talking about? So the first thing, and we've just spent the last 12 minutes talking about this, is creating the consistent policy. But let me give you some specifics around background screening and how that may be different than what we've talked about before. So the first thing is, let me say this, in the pre-employment side, it's called equal opportunity. And in the volunteer space, we're handling it exactly the same way. So you do not ever want to get into a situation where you're only asking people of a certain race, age, or anything like that about their background screening, or you're only screening people that kind of fall into a certain class or sect of individuals. That is exposing yourself to massive liabilities. And on top of everything else, it's not being a good example of Christ. So we want to have both of those boxes checked. We want to make sure that we're representing Christ well, that we are doing things according to scriptures, but then we also, from the culture in which we live, we find ourselves, we want to do things legally and according to the laws that we're given by our governing bodies. So your policy should also address existing volunteers as well as rescreening timeframes. So let me give you two more examples of things to consider when it comes to what needs to be in your background check policy. The first one is, let's say you're just getting this started, but you've been a church or you've had ministry volunteers for the past 7, 8, 9, 10 years with no issue whatsoever. So these are people who've been involved in your organization for a long time. You've had no issues with them, and you don't even have any concerns that there ever will be issues. What do I do about them? And that's a kind of a sticky situation, because you're going to go to a sweet grandma Betty who's been here for 10 years, and you're going to ask her to do a background check. Meanwhile, she's been volunteering faithfully for 10 years. She may be a little bit put off by that, maybe a little offended, and have questions for you about, well, I've been doing this for so long. Why now all of a sudden do I need to do this? And that's honestly, it's a great question, because that is something that I would be concerned about as well. So I'm going to give you a cheat. I'm going to cheat for you and give you the answer to the test. Okay. The first thing is, you can handle this a couple of different ways. Let me give you how I do it and how I've done it with my organization that I work with. We are not in any way profiling you or anyone else in the church. We're getting everyone up to speed with the most current protection policies and standards that the church is being held accountable to. So it is not a matter of trusting you. It has nothing to do with how I feel about your character or your personality. We're doing this across the board. And a great way to lead in this is to do one on yourself. Make sure that if I'm a staff member and I'm going to my volunteers and I'm telling them we're implementing a background screening policy, I better have a background check done on myself. That way I can tell them, hey, look, I've done this. My wife, my spouse, they've done this. And so this has nothing to do with how we feel about your character. This is about bringing the entire level of accountability and professionalism in the church and getting all of our policies up to speed with where they need to be. So that's the first part of the answer. That works, I would say, 93% of the time. Those are very official numbers based on just off the top of my brain. Now, the other way you can handle that, if let's say that's not good enough, is you can point them back to the example that I gave early on where, hey, listen, I know that I know you, and I have the utmost faith and confidence that you are a person of great character, moral integrity. I don't question you, but I've known you for a long time. So that is more than enough for me. However, as we're growing as a church, we have new families coming in who don't know you, who don't know your record of service, and who don't know your integrity. We want to have an objective measure in place where we can assure anyone who's new that not only do we have trust in you, but we have an objective third-party screening policy that puts you through a database of over 1 billion criminal records. And this person's coming back on the good side of that. So you don't have to worry about them being a registered sex offender or having criminal convictions in their record that would prohibit them from working with kids. We've done our due diligence as a church to make sure that those working with your kids as a new family, they're covered, and you don't have to worry about any sort of major red flags that we could have easily discovered if we had just done some basic due diligence. So that's another good way to handle it. So you got a couple of good talking tracks. Hopefully those work for you, and hopefully that's helpful. So step 2, when it comes to putting in a good policy, procedures, things like that, know your obligations. Now, background screening is a little bit of the wild, wild west where there's not a ton of legislation around it, but there is one major component that does affect us as a background screening company, as well as you, the end user, the one who's requesting the background check. It's called the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA. That has a lot of kind of requirements and stipulations and rules in there that affect you. I won't bore you with the 600-page document itself. I will give you some of the highlights. Again, giving you some cheat codes here. What do you need to know? So first things first, you have to let the volunteer employee know in writing and on a separate notice from your main application that you're going to use the information they give you for a criminal background check. That's called a notice of disclosure and authorization. So that's the disclosure and authorization form that lets them know we're going to use this to run a criminal background check on you. Now, I want to highlight again, that cannot be a part of the application itself. So most ministry positions have in place an application process. So you're going to give them if I want to be involved, I'm going to give you my name, my date of birth, my address, phone number, email, all the basic contact info. And then I'm probably going to fill out some type of interview, a questionnaire. What area of ministry do you want to be involved? Tell us about your previous volunteer experience at other churches. What are your spiritual gifts? What are your availabilities? So on and so forth. What cannot happen is you are building out that application and you're asking, what are your spiritual gifts? And, do you like nursery workers or do you feel better in elementary school? Oh, and by the way, we're also going to do a background check, sign here for that. And then also let's get back into your spiritual gifts again. Did you answer that part? You can't just continue on the application process. It has to be its own standalone form that is separate from any sort of interview, questionnaires, or application. It's its own. This is a background check release form. That's a very important thing. There has been litigation around if it's not done properly, it's not going to work. It's not going to go well for you. So make sure you have that as its own standalone, separate form, authorization, notice and disclosure for the authorization form. Now, inform the volunteer or the employee of his or her right to a description of the nature and scope of the investigation. We build that into our disclosure and authorization form. So on our consent form, it already has in there the entire scope of what may or may not be searched. Most background check companies do a similar process. If you're not sure, ask the company that you work with, does this really describe the scope of what we're searching for accurately? Do we need to edit this? What do we need to do? And then again, as a part of that, get the written permission to do the background checks. Note to that, some states may have additional requirements to provide state-specific disclosures and notifications. I know just off the top of my head, California and New York do. I believe Minnesota and a handful of others. So just check with legal counsel if you're not sure for your own state. Step 3, running the background check itself. This is the meat and potatoes. How do we actually do a background check? How does that process actually work? Because I find a lot of myths and misconceptions around what is a background check and what it's not. Let me start with what it's not. If you ever watch any television, any criminal, with Criminal Minds, NCIS or NCSI, I don't remember the name of those shows. All the same things where there's usually like this large database and you see like thousands and thousands of pictures all scrolling across the screen and they're just typing in and it's searching, bing, found a criminal record. And the myth there is there's one database out there that has all criminal information. Everyone uses the same thing. So a background check is just a background check. That is 100% fake. It does not exist. So let's put that little myth to bed forever. There is no one database that has all criminal records. It doesn't exist. It's not the FBI database. It's not a fingerprint database. None of those things exist. There are thousands of different repositories for criminal information and dozens of different ways to do background screening. And you can do it right, or you can do it wrong. And so it's very important to know kind of how that all happens. So let's start with this. If you're arrested, if I'm arrested, I don't want to say you're way too nice. You can believe it for me. If I get arrested, they're going to take me down to a local county courthouse, or not a courthouse, usually a county jail, the police. I'm going to be processed, and that processing is going to be, they're going to open a case file with all of my information. So name, date of birth, height, weight, sex, race, things like that, all the identifiers that show that it is me. They're going to list out a list of all the charges. I'm going to get booked. And then they're going to usually release me, hopefully. And I'm going to get a court date. At that point, I'll come back and I'll stand in front of a judge and say, this is what the crime that I've been charged with. I will be guilty, not guilty, whatever the case may be. And then that is then filed away at a local county courthouse. So that's where the information starts. It's at a local county level. Usually a clerk of courts maintains the criminal records for that local jurisdiction. That is the starting point for almost all criminal cases. Now, that's a county court. There are also federal crimes where if I commit a crime against the US government, that's a completely separate criminal justice system that's going through a completely separate court system. So we do have federal searches. I hear all the time, like, we do a federal check. And what people usually mean is I'm doing a national check. I'm doing a multi-state search, because when you say federal, what you're looking for when you're doing a federal search is crimes against the US government. So I remember being a kid and saying, don't mess with the mailbox. That's a federal offense. Don't mess with the mailman. That's a federal offense. Don't deface a county court system. That's a federal crime. those are all, it's crimes against the US government. So that's a separate system all itself that does have to be requested separately. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Now, what happens the next level is at a state repository level, they collect data from the different counties. So in Florida, it's the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. For Texas, it's Department of Public Safety. North Carolina is the Administrative Office of the Courts. Lots of different ways, lots of different states. So because we are organized and structured, our country is the way that it is, the states all operate in a very independent way. It's really unique and very interesting. And it's honestly a bit challenging when it comes to implementing quality screening policies, because if you want a statewide search, the way you do it in Florida may not be the same way you do it in Texas, North Carolina, Ohio, California. Some states, the only way to get a quality statewide search is to do a fingerprint. So California, Ohio, Louisiana, West Virginia. If you want a statewide search that covers all of those jurisdictions in one place, you're going to have to do a fingerprint. In other places, that's not true. In North Carolina, we get fantastic information from the Administrative Office of the Courts that covers felonies, misdemeanors, convictions, non-convictions, pretty much everything that you would want and need when you're doing a background check. But it does vary from state to state. And then those agencies report up to a national criminal database. And that multi-state database has information from all of the above sources. So it's going to have some counties that are giving monthly updates. It's going to have some statewide repositories that are doing monthly updates. And then there are going to be times where you've got no updates from county or state levels. And in those situations, the national database, quote unquote, is really not very good, with the only consistent source being a sex offender. We do have access to all 50 states' national sex offender search registries, and most CRAs do as well, a consumer reporting agency, background screening company. Most of them have access to each individual state's background, the sex offender registry, So that you can get for all 50 states, and it's typically not that complicated as far as how we're searching those. But outside of that, when you get to criminal, that can vary from state to state, and it could really be a lot different on how you do it by jurisdiction. So again, check with your company. If you're not using Protect My Ministry, and that's okay, check with whoever you are to make sure that the package you're searching really is giving you felonies, misdemeanors, convictions, non-convictions for your local area and the address history for the person you're searching. So that's really doing the right type of check. Requires a lot more in-depth consultation than I'm going to be doing in this particular presentation, because A, I don't want to bore you, and B, it's specific. There are so many if this, then this scenarios that you would need to cover that you just don't want to have that conversation right now, I promise. So let's talk about, all right, so what happens if, all right, Ryan, I get it. We need to do a good background check. I'm on board. Let's do a good background check. What happens then when we do a good background check and we find a disqualifying record? We find something that is a problem. So there are going to be some that are very, very easy. They're black and white. If it is a sexually based crime, sexual in nature, crime against a child, anything like that, obviously you're not going to be working in children's ministry. That's fairly straightforward. There are others that are a little bit more gray. So what about, and I see this happen every single week, you've got a volunteer who's coming in with the right heart, but they have a past. And so they'll go to the ministry director and say, hey, just so you know, back when I was in college, or back, I was a young adult, I didn't know, I had this come up. So you're probably going to find this on my record, and that could be a drug related case. That could be an assault crime where they got into a bar fight, things like that. What are we doing in that regard? How do we handle that? Well, the church, again, has to establish the policies of what you consider a disqualifying offense versus just a criminal record, because maybe not all criminal records are going to be disqualifying offenses. And so you'll have to determine that. And we would obviously have some recommendations around that. But at the end of the day, we cannot tell you what is or is not a disqualifying offense, because that would be us making a hiring decision for you. And we're not legally allowed to do that. We can give our opinion and what we see most churches doing. But at the end of the day, it's going to be between you, your legal counsel, and your leadership team to decide, okay, this is going to be disqualifying. This is going to be something that maybe needs further review. And then this is going to be a green light. Like, hey, we understand people have pasts and we're going to allow that to come through the door. So as much as you can make doesn't needs further review, the better, because that way you're not in a subjective scenario where you're having to make judgment calls. So you may find that to be the case on occasion, but you want that to be the exception and not the rule. You don't typically want to be making subject calls. You want to have the policy address the vast majority of those calls and decisions for you. So let's say you have one that is a disqualification. So this person has a violent crime that happened 3 years ago. And it's something that you would consider serious enough that, hey, we love you. We want you to be involved in the ministry. We appreciate your heart to serve. Let's plug you in over here. Okay. And so the way you deliver this message should always be with grace and humility, understanding that, but for the grace of God, there go I. So we want to always do things with the heart of, we love you and we want you to be serving and we want you to be plugged in. So let's get you in the right place. Okay. And this just at this time, we don't feel is the right place for you. So here are some other areas where we can maybe see you being able to serve. So let's start with that. And now we know we're having that conversation. How do we do it? So it's actually a two-step process. First is what's called a pre-adverse. So before you take the adverse action, you have to let them know that, hey, based on the information that came back from their background check, they're not going to be able to serve. Then you have to provide a copy of the report. So, well, how did you get to that decision? Well, here's the report. Here's the company that they used. And then they also get a summary of rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which you should receive from the company you're using. We have it on our website. We have it everywhere. So make sure that you have that information. Here is their summary of rights as given to them by the FCRA. You have to provide that as well. At that point, they now have what's called a reasonable amount of time to dispute that record. Most companies will give, and churches will give 7 to 14 days to allow them to, if they feel the need, go and dispute the accuracy of the results. Now, I don't know, I can't speak for every background screening company, but I know with Protect My Ministry, when we report a record, it is very unlikely that it's going to be inaccurate. I think our most recent statistics were we have an error rate of 1 out of every 80,000 checks. So it's very, very rare, at least for us. I can't speak for every background check company, but for Protect My Ministry, it's rare that we're going to give you criminal records and that not be an accurate report. So, but it could happen. And if it does, they get the opportunity to dispute that. Now, after that time frame has passed, you then are doing the second step of the process, which is now the true adverse action process. So you're rejected because of the information in the report from this position. We're still going to try and find somewhere else for you. Here's the name, the address, phone number of the company that sold it. And the company that we used did not make the hiring decision, and they have the right to dispute that information should they choose to do so. All right. So let's take a breath. Let's lean back a little bit. How do we do this? I know it can be a little overwhelming. So I will say, and again, this is not a sales pitch. I don't want to do that. I want to tell you that if you are at a place where you don't have these in your ministry, you don't have documents, you're not sure if the background check you're doing is the right one. You don't know if we're training our volunteers on how to spot and prevent sexual abuse. I don't really know where to get started. If that's the case, we do have some resources for you, and we're going to make them available to you at discounts. So let's talk about what this is and how it works. The first is Safety Rocket. This is a fantastic resource that is basically how to get started. It takes you from we have nothing to we are ready to go, and you can be done in a matter of, I don't want to say minutes, but hours, no more than a few hours, taking the documents that we've already prepared, sticking your logo on them, getting people to sign it, call it a day. So it's got branded and unbranded documents. And that is a lot of the things that we talked about very early on: the child wellness policies, your security programs, active shooter policies. All of that actually came from the Safety Rocket. So we pulled out some of the content and we just built a lot more around it inside of Safety Rocket. So it's got 6 modules: children's safety, background checks, human resources, insurance, safety procedures, facilities. And it's got ebooks and lectures and just so much great information. It's extremely affordable. If you're interested and you don't have a good place to start, let us help you with Safety Rocket, and it will get you from where you are now to where you're trying to be way, 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 way faster than you trying to do it all yourself. If that's interesting to you, fantastic. Let us know. We're happy to help. If not, we'll keep right on moving. Child safety training for volunteers. So this is a really important thing. And again, this is not something that you have to do through Protect My Ministry. There are other options out there. We contend they're not going to find a whole lot more that are better and that are going to be more cost effective. We do feel like we are the absolute best in the country when it comes to the balance of good quality training and being cost effective. But neither here nor there. The point is, make sure that you've got something in place for training your volunteers. And what the idea here is, we want everyone on the same page and looking for the common patterns and behavioral characteristics of abusers. Because believe it or not, one misconception that some people have is that these people are not very intelligent, or they're stupid, or they are just kind of flying by the seat of their pants and just kind of making it up as they go. That's not true. These people who are abusing children, usually in churches and other ministries, they're not your Larry and Marv from Home Alone. As a good friend of mine also in the industry likes to say, they're not those guys from Home Alone. They're not kind of buffoons and what they're usually very intelligent. They are absolutely skilled liars, pathological liars, but are so convincing that they've often convinced themselves, to the point where 90% of abusers would self-identify as highly religious people. Now, if you can't reconcile that in your mind, jump in line. Neither can I. I have no idea. But it's usually because the amount of self-delusion has gotten so deep that a person believes that they can be something that they are very clearly not. And so what we're trying to do with the training is get all of our volunteers on the same page for, that doesn't look right. Something about the way this person's acting, it just seems strange. And it kind of gets you looking a little bit more closely and paying closer attention to subtle signs. And what that does more than anything else, and our prayer is always that you never have to have the conversation where something horrible has happened in your church. What we want to do is create an environment where it's just so prohibitive and so difficult for a predator to get in the door that it's just easier for them to move on. And they say, you know what? Forget this. I'm not going to try and get involved in this church. They do background screening and they've got this training I have to do, and they've got a waiting period before I'm allowed to work with kids. And they've got this, and they've got so many things that are lined up. Man, forget that. I'm just going to go to another church and find somewhere else to go, which is what you want. That's a win. If you never have to have the conversation for, oh, this went horribly wrong. Great. Praise God. That's exactly what we want to have happen, right? So the training is another great way of getting everyone on the same page, looking for that same thing. And again, building that wall of, man, it's not going to happen in our doors. If we can do everything we can to prevent it, we're going to make it so difficult for people to kind of pry their way in and try to abuse or build relationships for the wrong reasons. We're not going to allow that to happen here. So that's great. Another thing is we've seen in 2020 in the COVID world is so many things are moving to online, and how do we do this online, and how do we make this happen? And we created a cyber predator ebook for how to prevent yourself and some best practices for preparing your ministry for online risks. That's a great tool. It's free. It's on our website. Go download it, take it, spread it, go nuts. The other one that's really nice that we have, this is a fairly new process, is real-time monitoring. So background screening is great from right now and then everything in the past, right? But what about the future? What about if somebody gets involved in your ministry and then 6 months down the road, they relapse and they've got a DUI or DWI, or they have some other criminal thing happen? We do offer, and other companies do as well, and this is something you may want to consider, especially for those who are going to be higher profile. They're going to have a lot of exposure to kids. Real-time monitoring. What we do is we put their name on a list of constantly monitored criminal records, and it's 92% coverage. So that's remarkably good coverage for the entire country. If you are arrested in 92% of the counties in the country, we are going to find it and we're going to alert you. It's typically within 48 hours of the booking date. So it's very much, it's as close to real time as you can possibly get. If you're interested in that, great. It's a fantastic tool that we highly recommend. Next is social media screening. Again, as we've moved online, we've seen a drastic rise in social media being a major part and a major component of all of our lives. So what are we doing about that, and what are we looking for? So when we're doing social media screens, and we do offer this for churches as well. We're looking for hostility, harassment, bullying. We're doing it so that we can keep our employees safe, and we're also trying to avoid any bad publicity. Lord knows we've seen enough times where people say or do something silly on Facebook or Twitter, and that gets you in just a world of trouble. So we've seen since COVID-19 hit just a massive increase in social media usage. So just a couple of statistics that came out earlier in 2020, there were over 233 million active users in the US that are on Facebook. That's insane. And so we had 6 million people increase in April. In Instagram, we had over 130 million people on Instagram. That's crazy. That's such a massive part of our world and our culture. We've seen flagged content. The majority of it happens on Facebook and Twitter. People say and post silly things there, but there are other ones as well. So we do have ways of screening that, where our system, our artificial intelligence will automatically search every publicly available site that ties into a person's name. And we're going to look specifically for any sort of intolerance. So any sort of content that's flagged for racism, bigotry, sexism. We have sexually explicit content that we're looking for, potentially violent content, potentially illegal. So things that have to do with, child pornography, drug use, things like that. And then we can customize some things around what your organization is looking for. So this is just an example of what that social media check will look like. We'll give you a summary. We'll provide a picture that we pulled from the candidate's social media profile so you can match it up to the volunteer that you've screened. If you want to look into that, you're welcome to do it. The advantage to having Protect My Ministry do it as opposed to you is the time, because we're not just looking for one, we're looking for, with our basic social media check, we're looking for the top 5 media sites. So that's going to be your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and LinkedIn. So those top 5 sites, that's where we're looking. And then we're going to show you exactly what we found, and you can kind of make a decision from there. Background screening is excellent for criminal records. The social media screening is great for character. So it's going to give you maybe a little fuller picture of what this person's into. We highly recommend it for staff, especially staff working with kids, or any sort of staff who are going to be the public face of your organization. So this is another thing we want to talk about, is the why. Like I said earlier, 90% of the child abuse cases involve someone they know and trust. It's going to be typically someone close to them. We want to make sure that our staff and volunteers are engaged, and they know, they understand, and they agree to all the policies that are implemented by the church. So a couple of closing remarks and things to take away from this. Do you have a safety plan in place? Are you training your employees and volunteers on the safety procedures consistently? One time is not enough. We recommend rescreening your volunteers and staff annually if you can, but no more than every 2 to 3 years. So that's a great thing to do, is not just to run them once, but to redo that every 2 to 3 years, no longer than that. Are you running the background checks, and are they the right checks? How do you know they're the right checks? Make sure you're asking a trusted professional. Even if you don't use Protect My Ministry, please hunt me down and find me, and I would love to have that conversation with you, whether you use us or not. So think through, document, and implement your plan. So if you have any questions, please contact us, support@protectmyministry.com. Again, my name is Ryan Carter. I would love to be a part of this with you. I would love to walk you through this journey. If you have any questions, concerns, please feel free to call us or email or contact me directly. Find us, and I would be happy to help. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the attention, and we look forward to working with you.